Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Doorstep podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Gvosdev, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Council.
And I'm Tatiana Serafin, also Senior Fellow here at Carnegie Council, welcoming today back Peter Sand, who is now the Chief Analyst at Zenita. So he's in a new position, but same great voice on global supply chains, which I think are so important. So in a minute, we'll hear from him. But Nick, I want to hear about that great Bloomberg report you read earlier this week and share it with our audience.
Sure. This is in Bloomberg. It's Daniel Flatley, Nick Wadhams, and Saliha Mohsen. And they're writing about the Biden administration now taking a look at the impact of sanctions on Russia for what it's doing to disrupt global supply chains, and even what the doorstep impacts may or may not be in the United States. Not that they're saying that we should necessarily stop sanctions against Russia because of its invasion of Ukraine, but the realization that U.S. foreign policy, in this case, reacting to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is in turn having a doorstep domestic impact, and looking at ways, can it be mitigated, or does the administration, in essence, try to convince American companies that there are areas that aren't sanctioned against Russia, particularly with food, fertilizers, to try to get more of that to market, and really this effort to try to get alternate sources of supply, which of course is one of the big motivations for why President Biden, after resisting many months from doing this, is going to travel to Saudi Arabia next month.
This is so timely for our discussion with Peter because he addresses many of the issues that you raised. So I'm looking forward to myself reading that report. But I do think there is a lot going on with internally in the US as we face rising inflation, rising gas prices, and discussions about what are we doing in Ukraine. So to another article in The Hill this week, I don't know if you saw it, but oh no, so I'm sorry, it wasn't in The Hill, it was in TNR. There's a big war brewing among Republicans over, well, war was the headline by Jordan Michael Smith, talking about how, in fact, there's a bunch of senators and congressmen who are debating internally in the Republican Party whether we should continue support in Ukraine. I know this is a big area of discussion that kind of dovetails with the report that you read. You know, what are we doing? Because people at home are not ready, I think, to lose more money at the pump, to pay higher prices. I think this is going to be a bigger issue as we continue on for midterms. And I'm wondering, kind of, what are your thoughts? If you saw that article in TNR, what are your thoughts on it? And what have you been hearing? Is there rising dissent?
Well, what this points to is something we've been doing at the Carnegie Council for the last 5 years or so, which is these questions of narrative. Why does the U.S. do certain things in the world? How does it connect to the home front, so to speak? And can you convince or persuade Americans that sometimes sacrifices are necessary for these longer term goals? I think that what the Bloomberg report touches on is the sense that the Biden administration, I think, hoped that these massive economic sanctions on Russia could be done in a way that would produce maximum pressure on Russia, but have minimal impacts on the United States and other Western countries. And now that the invasion continues onward, Russians aren't changing their position. They're not leaving. And now we're starting to see those costs of those sanctions and then Russian counter sanctions begin to pile up. And then to this point in New Republic of Jordan's piece, which is this sense of, well, what exactly should the U.S. be doing in the world? And at what cost to the domestic constituencies? And so this really is about, as we've always been looking at Carnegie, it's a question of competing narratives. It's an internationalist narrative, the traditional bipartisan post-Cold War narrative, running up against a narrative as we did in some of our reports in 2019, these are narratives of restraint. These are narratives of America needs time to rejuvenate at home before it can be more active abroad. And we're seeing that play out first in the Republican Party. So far, progressives have, in the Democratic Party, have stayed the course with the Biden administration on this. But some of that skepticism, thinking of people like Representative Mohana in particular, about U.S. intervention overseas is there. And some of this may be that as this continues, some of that willingness to continue to support the administration's approach on Ukraine, you may find some Democrats also beginning to question this. And these issues are all connected, and they're connected at a time, particularly for younger people, something that we'll also talk about with Peter, that a lot of the assumptions about lifestyle that we have grown accustomed to in the last 10 or 15 years of technology, just-in-time supply chains. I tap in something on my mobile phone and deliveries are made, and that those are inexpensive deliveries, whether DoorDash or whether I need Uber or whether furniture will show up within a few days of placing an order. We may be moving into a new era where some of those assumptions no longer apply.
Well, let's see what Peter has to say and how much it's going to cost us right now. Thank you so much for joining us on the Doorstep. Almost a year till when you were on, Peter. How are you doing? Where are you? And oh my gosh, so much to talk about.
Right now, planet Earth, Northern Europe, and absolutely delighted to be back on the Doorstep with you and Nick, Tatiana. Thanks for having me. I think we have a lot of interesting things to talk about. Supply chains are all over the place right now.
Yes, and I think that a year ago, there was a lot of optimism on your part that things would come together and that we were headed in a good direction, and kind of life as we know it has really changed unexpectedly for so many reasons over the past year. I do want to take us to the war in Ukraine and the impact that has had. But before we go there, for our audience, we are always looking how to engage them globally, and shipping for certain engages every single one of us, as we talked about last year and continues to be the case so importantly this year. And this week, and I know you tweeted about it, so I want to start off with this because the U.S. House of Representatives on Monday approved the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which is now going to Biden for signature. It talks about an increased oversight of shipping, which supporters say will help curb the big word, inflation. Will it? I don't know, won't it? But it got a lot of bipartisan support, and we don't have a lot of that lately. 369 to 42 approved in the House. You signaled your approval on Twitter. Can you talk to us about what this act really means? Will it have a huge impact? Is it necessary for us here at home, and how America engages in the world?
I think it is definitely a step in the right direction, mostly for the American exporters and mostly for those that export agricultural goods all over the world. Several of Senator's customers have also engaged us in discussions about how can this go on? What is actually happening? Can it really be so that that carriers can shy away from our goods, favoring, say, fresh air in boxes heading in another direction than our fresh produce? Let's cross our fingers. Let's see how this will actually develop. But it is surely a crunch time also for global carriers serving U.S. customers. The FMC is definitely now getting just a little bit more armor and a little bit more weapons in terms of, structuring how the American economy is well served by global liners. But the reason for me also to approve this is that from a shipper's perspective, I think this is at least one step in the right direction. But there's always a flip side to the coin, and I guess we might as well just jump right into it. There's a price to everything, because if carriers are to ensure that U.S. exporters will get a box for their produce. What's the price of that? I mean, normally exports out of U.S. is fairly cheap, and exports in or imports into the U.S. is super expensive, at least comparably. So obviously there may also be U.S. importers that will then cry foul if they cannot get the boxes that they want for their imports. So you cannot please everyone, but I think it's just one step in the right direction. Let's see what more needs to be done. But in essence, I think it doesn't necessarily say clear up all the bottlenecks that we see left, right, and center, but it's one step in the right direction for some American importers for sure.
So you mentioned FMC. Just for our audience, I want you to know that that's the Federal Maritime Commission that's been kind of overlooking what's been going on. And let's get back to your comment about bottlenecks. Because last year I thought, we were talking about, and I thought, want to mention, you gave a great description. So for our audience, go back to that podcast for talking about how shipping lines and global shipping works. I also refer everybody to Catherine Schultz's New Yorker article that came out in the last week. And Peter, if you haven't seen it, it's really great. Also talks about kind of global shipping and containers and what it means and volume, so that people really understand at the doorstep where we get our things and why it takes so much and how much it costs, to your point on price. But last year you thought that in 12 to 18 months, there might be some sort of easing of congestion. And I don't think we're seeing that. So what are you thinking now? Are you still optimistic?
I'm always optimistic. And I'm also pessimistic if that's required. Above all, I try to stay realistic. And what have happened in the global supply chains since we last spoke has basically been a little bit whack-a-mole game. So every time where we have seen obstacles to trade being cleared, some of them being eased, we have seen new ones come up. You mentioned already in your opening the war in Ukraine, Eastern Europe. We have also seen 2-month plus lockdown of Shanghai. So we might in Northern Europe and also North America see at least the worst part of the COVID pandemic behind us. We're seeing a different kind of, say, hangover right now, perhaps from some of that massive economic stimuli that prevented everyone from going bankrupt and falling into recession at that point in time. But I think what we have seen also is a lot of, if we focus on the US and some of the major retailers that just came out with their warnings a couple of weeks, days, month ago, also saying that they have bloated inventories for at least some goods. So they have, of course, done what they could do on their behalf to make sure that the goods are ready on the shelves for their sales, for their customers. And while doing so, of course, they have also pushed forward goods that are only for sale later in the year. So it's a little bit of a clearing sale also for some goods right now. I think you will see so quite soon in order for new goods that were brought in early, also as one way of say building resilient supply chains. And I think we see that from many suppliers and importers around the globe, that they're really focusing on literally two aspects right now. As we are also aware that Seneta data also shows that the spot market for container shipping freight rates have fallen by some 20% over the past couple of weeks and month. So obviously some shippers are also looking to save a few bucks on freight procurements right now. But the flip side of that coin is, of course, will they do so at the expense of the security and supply chains that they also get from signing, say, more close relationship with the global carriers in long-term contracts? So there's always more to it than meets the eye. So I'm as optimistic as I can get around those 15 and 18 months that I'm afraid we still have ahead of us, because as long as we get an equal amount and a serious amount of say obstacles in front of us as compared to those that are cleared, we're moving sideways and not really into easing. But it may be the one silver lining to at least the headwind that we see now from inflation, from rising interest rates, that some of the say the steam global consumerism is coming off, and that gives time for supply chains also to normalize.
There was some talk and some cautious optimism in Turkey over this past week that there might be an ability to arrange safe corridors in the Black Sea, because the Russian invasion of Ukraine obviously has stranded a good deal of Ukrainian exports that can't be exported through the Black Sea to their markets. This is creating the upward pressure on food prices that we see around the world. From your perspective, what kind of guarantees would shippers be looking for when Turkey says we've made an arrangement with Russia to open Ukrainian ports? What would be the kinds of things that shippers would be looking at before they would want to send cargo ships, say, into Odessa to start loading up on grain? And is this in fact going to be a feasible way forward? Can we actually develop these humanitarian corridors to allow grain and food exports from Ukraine to pass unmolested?
It's a brilliant question, and I have for some months now been discussing exactly that. Could we make a humanitarian corridor to ease at least some of the say inflation on grain prices, and also especially those underdeveloped countries that more dearly also definitely find themselves well on the brink of hunger in many cases, should they not bring all this grains from primarily Ukraine. We're talking about some 50 million tons potentially on an annual basis that is short now in the global markets. But to cut to the chase, I would not expect that the Russian president will accept and set something up like this. I know that the international community, also at the United Nations, is putting up more heat and definitely also putting names and shames to this whole situation. And it's not necessarily easing the pathway to a humanitarian corridor and bringing grains out, even with Turkey's offer to assist, because we need, I mean, for every shipper here, a safe passage. For every ship owner that is likely to make its ship available also to this. I mean, the warships right now blocking the coastline of Ukraine needs to ensure also that those ships are getting a say free entry and free exit. And right now, it's a war zone. We know that from not only say war risk insurance premium being paid for ships transiting that area, but I would I would say it like this: I would definitely hope it will happen, but I highly doubt it, I'm afraid.
Let's stay on this topic of insurance premiums and what people are willing to do or not do, because I just read this interesting article in Bloomberg about the US encouraging agricultural and shipping companies to buy and carry more Russian fertilizer. So moving on from grain to fertilizer, which is really complex, a complex issue, because, we're accusing Russia of using food as a weapon, by preventing Ukraine from exporting. But here we are on the flip side, asking shipping companies to try to ship more fertilizer out because Moscow is a key global supplier. What are you hearing on that front? Are shipping companies saying no? Are people willing to deal with Russia? And we're supposed to have sanctions here, but fertilizer is one of the exemptions.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, because nobody in the shipping industry, nor as a trader in fertilizers or grain, would like to get caught up in breach of sanctions. So you really need to tread carefully when doing this. But you're absolutely right, Tatiana. It's a funny thing, right? That all of a sudden American importers are requested and even encouraged to bring in more fertilizers from the US. But it also proves the fact that we all need one another. We are a part of a global ecosystem, all of us. So we better trade with one another. I'm afraid that we also can conclude that trade didn't do the whole trick this time around with Russia. So sorry for taking that one. But indeed, I think the global shipping industry is ready also to serve those customers that can do say legal trading in fertilizers out of Russia right now. We must also admit that many of the, especially in container shipping, the global carriers of European origin that no longer calls Russian ports. Some have even sold big terminal assets also since the outbreak of the war. That it is a global shipping world, and people from all over the world may not necessarily see the unrest in Ukraine in the same way as you and I do. And it may not be in breach of local sanctions. It may be that they can still do trading, and I guess that's always say the one thing that you need to be aware of when looking at the global shipping systems. So I'm absolutely sure that there are shippers standing ready, but naturally it also comes with a premium. I mean, these trades in whichever form they may take will definitely also be done with special, say, safety premiums on top of this, not only for the seafarers, mostly, of course, but certainly also for the ship owners and operators that will carry the fertilizers in the end.
How much are all these premiums adding to inflation? I mean, can we blame everything on shipping?
In short, no, absolutely not. We can, depending on the commodity that you look at, of course, and depending on what kind of country you are living in. I know that UNCTAD, the UN trade body, soon will shed more light on this exact topic in terms of grains and shipping and the impact on inflation. So watch out for that. But in terms of how much we can blame shipping and container shipping freight rates, that is my key focus. I mean, we surely have seen elevated prices for more than 2 years now. It would be a no-brainer to say that it is causing inflation. But I have to disappoint someone. It's not the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I mean, the real inflation is coming from the economic stimuli provided to consumers around the globe, and especially in the US. But naturally, the longer that you have also high prices on transports, it becomes, say, an integrated part also of the costs, and not only something that importers may take on their own shoulder and without passing it on if that was a temporary case. But we had it for 2 years now, and we may have it for at least another year. So some of that is likely to prove sticky. Also when container shipping freight rates go down again, and also when fertilizer freight rates or dry bulk freight rates, for that matter, is also contributing to some extent. But it's not the lion's share of the inflation part of it. But it's definitely also playing a part.
Well, this feeds in, then how does this connect to average lived experience? And, there was a fascinating piece earlier this week in the Atlantic magazine by Derek Thompson talking about the end of what he calls the millennial consumer subsidy, that the idea that you could just, and he talks about the just in time, I can tap away on my phone and everything from food to furniture shows up in an instant. And to say, well, prices are going up. It's not as cheap to do this anymore. There are supply chain disruptions. What do you see the impact from the shipping side of all of this on standards of living, on what people have grown accustomed to over the last number of years? And the pandemic accelerated this with people staying at home and ordering in for delivery of all sorts of goods and services. What do you see with these, as Tatiana asked, with the higher premiums and choke points? Does this mean we're going to see a bit of ratcheting back on standards of living particularly in the industrialized countries?
The cost of living for everyone is definitely rapidly going up right now. But in terms of going back to the comfort of ordering everything and getting it at your doorstep only a few days from now, there is no going back on that. But I think what this supply chain crisis, and also the recent inflation is also telling people that things are not necessarily always that cheap. And I think also if we are going to put, say, a little bit more perspective on this and put in perhaps a little bit of climate change and that, say, massive challenge also that is around us, if consumers are serious about, say, having carbon footprint labels on each product, then they also need to act and to walk the talk when they do so, and it comes with a cost. All this ease of consumerism that is has also been everywhere, seen over the past 2 years, and you will never go back to that once you see the say how things have moved on. It will stay more complex going forward. It will become more hybrid, and I guess that's also, if I may, also say, bring this back to the world of global liner shipping, because global liners have also made windfall profits to the extent of several hundred billions of dollars, and they are to spend these money wisely. And a way that they could do this is, of course, not only to bring up higher standard, higher services for what they deliver to global shippers, but they are also investing in door-to-door logistics right now, more so than they have ever done before, because they have just spent 1 decade losing money and focusing on port to port. Now they want to do things differently. They want to fly more stuff around. They want to bring it from production side into your doorstep. So I think we're seeing not a bullet train continuing in that regard, but we definitely see changes that we will not say unwind or rewind due to the obstacles that we tend to see right now. That's how I see it, at least.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot about the changes in the supply chain of the shipping industry itself. So that to your point, door to door, also getting into other areas. I've been reading a lot about real estate, right? Because a lot of the ports can't contain all these container ships. There's still backlog. So people are buying up real estate around port areas, kind of changing the landscape of what these areas look like, which I find fascinating. So they're going from just owning, a tank or, containers to owning real estate and owning, and moving, and, that entails a whole host of dealing with other government regulatory agencies and, rules, et cetera. So what other changes on this kind of macro industry scale have you seen since we spoke over the last 12 months? Because I think these changes are really going to impact us at home too, from everything from jobs, to real estate, prices. What have you seen more on that?
What we have seen is definitely a global interest in investing, and in real estate. That also comes in the form of terminal logistics facilities in Africa. We have seen the European carrier, the world's largest, if you measure it right now, MSC. Just buying Bolloré's African logistics facilities. So they're buying real estate. They're also buying assets in form of not only say cargo carriers, freighters. We're also seeing the French CMA CGM supporting, I guess, some political initiatives, buying a huge stake in Air France, and now getting all the way up to, I think, 9.7%. So do not underestimate the power of, say, national politics as well as geopolitics in this whole sense, because Maersk Line, also one of the bigger carriers, of course, have also made investments in US. They have made investments also in the Far East for logistics companies, trying to be this integrator of supply chains, and without doubt, one of the things that we at Senator definitely expect will come out of this supply chain crunch right now is even more complex supply chains going forward. When people set up what we could term China plus one, just in time supply chain, adding a just in case supply chain, which may be also set up somewhere in the Far East. I think that's the dominant strategy in my eyes. But it may also be the fact that some if they can set up a fully automated facility in the heart of Europe or in the heart of US for that matter, that may also be the case because labor cost at the end of the day also for products like this is essential. So the name of the game is supply chain resilience, and global carriers is definitely trying to sell peace of mind to whomever is ready to buy that at just the right price going forward, to also make sure that they are the essential service provider going forward, and in the end at the benefit of all of us global consumers wherever we may find ourselves.
Yeah.
Interesting your point about the just in case supply chain and diversification even within Asia, because that's something that another Doorstep guest, Parag Khanna, not so much in the context of the Doorstep, but on some of his other writings, has also been looking at those questions of alternate supply lines in Asia that can bypass China or don't always depend on China sourcing. So it's interesting to see how that's taking shape.
I think if I may comment a little bit on the impact also intra-Asia from the lockdown in China. It was not only goods that were readily produced and good to go into the North American continent or North Europe. It was definitely also raw materials and semi-finished goods that were clogged up when the most important port of them all, Shanghai, was locking down, and it was in the immediate aftermath of lockdowns down in Yantian. We also saw Changjiang up north of being all but closed down. So it's a constant moving target up and down the coastline right now in China, with Ningbo also being at the center of attention. And I guess I mean, the one thing that we may not have touched on up until now in global supply chains, a shortage of truckers. That seems to be the one thing that is labeling also the say the most critical part of global logistics right now. In China, they are prohibited from going say from one part of the town to the other part of the town without several stops and testings carried out. So that of course is putting plenty of roadblocks up. We're seeing this European mobility package also putting somewhat of a spanner in the wheel of the road haulage, where trucks need to go back to their say home every 8 weeks. That is definitely also dragging capacity out. And in North America, it has been the case also for a long time, and especially also when you've seen terminals, most predominantly during the pandemic on the US West Coast, really being clogged up with also truckers not being capable of doing their job to their best possible extent. So
yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I'll bring it to the doorstep. I waited 3 months for a tiny lamp to come from California because it was stuck on a truck, and their truck had no driver. So on a small scale, but really, again, for our audience, relating how a global issue touches every one of us, that we really need to look at this. And that's why we're so glad you were able to come back and speak with us today. So, we touched a little bit about what you think might happen in the next 12 months in various aspects. But, what is the, your grand vision? Last time there was a lot of, we're a globalized society. We are, we need to recognize that Russia has thrown a rift into that sentiment, as you mentioned. What is the general feeling out in Europe? I know here in the US, the war has sort of left the headlines a little bit. You're closer, things are closer there. What is the general sentiment there? Can the hole that Russia has left in the global system be repaired? What is your sentiment on that front?
Without doubt, it is still everyday headline in Europe, but of course that's also because it's in our backyard. And it impacts us to a large extent, especially on the energy perspective, with the gas and oil being cut at large. also bringing the price up at the pump to new highs in Europe, as it has done also in the US. But definitely, it does leave a significant hole in global supply chains. Fortunately, you can say that in many aspects, at least of container shipping, Russia was not a massive player. It was a significant player, but not a massive player. The real, say, critical hole to plug for the global supply chains is definitely for fossil fuels, gas and oil, and that's why we that will be, say, the whiptail to all of this. That is all about bringing this war to an end, getting those sanctions really to work and tighten the grip. But in terms of bridging the gap, there's a lot of politics that need to work, and there's also a future that you need to prepare, because there is no, let's say, returning point in this. Russia is excluding itself from the global, at least mostly Western European society, of course, still with friends around the globe. As I said, complex matters in global geopolitics, but still they are excluding themselves for a massive market and from a lot of investments also from the Western part of the world. So it's very much still on the agenda here in Europe as it drags on. I'm not really sure that I can call the end of the war anytime soon. I would love to, but it surely looks like there's some sort of end game on right now. Whether that end game will be month or quarters, way too early to say. But fingers crossed that we will soon make use of shipping for rebuilding a nation, more than say trying to avoid doing business with another nation. So I think that would be perhaps the silver lining from what is really an obstacle also around container terminals across Europe, mostly Hamburg, Wilhelmshaven in the northern part of Germany. It's really having problems still with containers bound for Russia now being stuck. We have seen special, say, container yards being set up also in Denmark, where Maersk Line is basically making a whole new part of the port just for boxes going nowhere. So that's of course also adding to a lack of boxes and equipment elsewhere. So there's still a lot of unwinding to do before we can really say move on from that current crisis.
You make a really important point. I like that visual of boxes going nowhere. I think that's a song or something. But thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to having you back to talk more about these behemoths that are going to emerge in global logistics, because I think that is the next phase. People always talk about Elon Musk. My God, if there's another Elon Musk headline, and I just said his name again, but he's not in this. We need to talk about the people who are in logistics, and I'd like to keep our focus on that. And Nick and I will continue to look at it and welcome you back next year to see where we are in this space.
It'll be my pleasure. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for listening to The Doorstep, sponsored by the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs. For more, go to carnegiecouncil.org. Stay healthy and safe.